So first I want to start off to just have you imagine. So you're walking through the forest with your family or your friends, and you're looking at the beautiful fall colors and the leaves, and you look down and you see these fingers coming out of the ground. So the first thought maybe is that maybe somebody was buried alive. Or maybe it's an undead creature that's trying to come back to life and come back to Earth. Or maybe it's actually just a mushroom. So this is, in all actual fact, a species of mushroom called Xylaria polymorpha, or it's also known as dead man's fingers. And why I bring this up is just to say that, you know, a lot of the times scary movies as well as sci-fi comes up with these crazy things to make you scared. But a lot of times nature and biology itself can be really terrifying. And that's really what I want to explore with you today while we wonder whether we should be afraid and fear the Walking Dead. So just to start off, I'm a research associate at the University of Toronto, and I did my PhD in microbiology. And microbiology is the study of small things and small organisms. So this can be things like bacteria and viruses. But I like to think that I was born to be a microbiologist because in all actual fact, I am quite the microbiologist. All joking aside, what I lack in height, I make up for in my love of microbes, and I really want to share that with you today. So some of the research that I did in my PhD worked on the fungus, Candida albicans. And so this fungus is very closely related. It's in the same family as mushrooms, just like the mushrooms I showed you on the first slide. But they're actually microorganisms, so they're really, really small, and we can't usually see them with our bare eye unless we're looking at millions of cells of them that grow together in these communities, or unless we use a very powerful microscope like on the right. And so these can be quite scary because in actual fact, almost every single one of us here has these funguses growing inside of us. And you never really notice, they never really cause you any harm. But it's only when your immune system is compromised that they can really start to attack, and they can cause things like athlete's foot as well as yeast infections. But in really serious cases of immunocompromisation, like if you were undergoing chemotherapy or if you had HIV, they can also cause bloodstream infections that can be very, very fatal. And so I wanted to share this idea of how microbes can be extremely beautiful, as you can see with some of these pictures, but they can also be very scary. And so this scary side is what we're going to look at today, because the reason why we're all here is to talk about how microbes can be scary, and the scariest thing that they can do is really cause zombies. So zombies are these undead organisms or monsters, and they seem to be popping up everywhere. So there are tons of movies and video games, as well as TV shows that are all about zombies. And every single one, the zombies look different, but they're all incredibly, incredibly scary. And the one thing about every single one of them is that they're all caused by microbes. So you would never have any zombies if it wasn't for the microbes. Now you might be kind of confused because a lot of times you don't really hear about the microbes when people talk about zombies. You always talk about the scary parts of zombies, but nobody really ever talks about the creator, which is these microbes. And that's because microbes play only a really small role in a lot of these movies or TV shows. So you might hear, and they might talk about how these zombies are caused by infections that you get when zombies, bite humans and then pass along a zombie-causing agent. But a lot of the times they talk about these in really vague terms. So they'll call them, pathogens or contagions or infections. But that doesn't really tell you anything about the identity of the microbes themselves. And now this is a huge problem. So for the firstly, because these microbes are not getting the credit that they deserve for all the hard work that they're doing to cause these zombies. They really should be the stars of this. But also as a microbiologist, it's actually a serious worry because they're breaking the first rule of infectious disease, which is you can't kill a microbe if you don't know what it is. So you really need to know the identity of the kind of microbe you have, because there's so many different kinds, and the way we treat them and the drugs that we use to treat them are completely different. So what I want to do is really introduce you to the main players here, which these are the villains that can cause zombies. So our first villain are fungus. And that is, as I mentioned before, what I worked on my PhD. And so funguses are all around us, and they can cause infections like athlete's foot, yeast infections, as well as diaper rashes. And in the movies, they cause zombies in The Girl with All the Gifts. Now, our second villain is something you might be very familiar with, which is bacteria. And bacteria are also everywhere, and they're also within us, and they cause many different kinds of infection, including strep throat, as well as food poisoning. And so these are smaller than the fungus, but still very deadly, and they cause zombies in The Last Day on Mars. So our third villain are viruses, and these viruses cause a lot of the common infections that you get, like flus and the colds, and they also cause more serious things like HIV. And in the movies, this causes zombies in 28 Days Later. So these might be the kinds of microbes that you're more familiar with, but there's also one other one that I want to talk to you about. So our fourth villain are prions, and these are really, really scary because they're non-living infectious agents. So how this works is usually your body is made of a whole bunch of proteins. These are little structures that have a particular shape that helps them to do their normal function. So in a prion, what you have is that protein has lost all of its shape, regular shape, and it's become a disordered protein. And the scary part about this is when a prion encounters a normal protein, it can then cause that normal protein to also lose its shape and become disordered. And this can cause a huge aggregation of large amounts of proteins that can no longer use their proper function. And so this is really scary because it can spread disease very quickly, and we're still in the beginning stages of understanding how they work, and so we don't know very many ways of how to treat them. And I don't know if anybody's seen Zombieland, but that's my favorite zombie movie, and prions are what causes the zombies in that case. Okay, so now that we've met all of the villains and all the key players here, this really leads us to the important question of the night, which is, could microbes ever really cause zombies? And so to be able to really understand this, we need to take our stethoscopes out and put our doctor's hats on and really think about what is a zombie. So what are the combination of traits together that makes a zombie? So I put out some of the ones that I think. So first you have this decomposing skin. They seem like they're rotting. They also seem to have a difficulty moving, and they're not able to really run fast, but they're just trekking along. They don't really communicate very much. They more grunt and communicate that way. They're very aggressive, and they bite people. But they also have a bunch of other traits, including, and most importantly, that they're dead, but they appear to be moving. And also in that case, they also seem to be controlled by something that's not themselves. So they lose their free will and their autonomy, and there's something else that's controlling them and making them act in their ways. So what we really need to do is to answer this question about whether microbes could cause zombies in real life. We need to understand, are there microbes around that cause these different kinds of symptoms? So to start, there's bacteria, and they can cause a disease called necrotizing fasciitis, also known as flesh-eating disease. So this is caused by different kinds of bacteria, including Staphylococcus aureus. So how this works is normally you have your layer of skin is what protects you from bacteria getting inside. But if you get a really deep cut or a burn, or let's say you get a needle and it goes really far down, that provides an entryway for the bacteria to get inside. And they can grow deep within your tissues and start to release toxins. And these are the same kinds of toxins that make you sick when you get food poisoning. So these toxins are building up in your tissues, and they can start to cause the death of the tissues and the muscles around it. And this can lead to a lot of pain as well as swelling, and ultimately it leads to decomposition and that decomposing of the skin that you see in the zombies. Next up, we have the motor problems as well as some of the behavioral problems and the aggression. And this can all be explained with mad cow disease. So mad cow disease is a disease that's caused by prions, particularly in cattle, and there have been huge outbreaks of these in the UK in the past. So what happens here is these prions get within the brain as well as the spinal cord of these cows, and they start expanding and causing the degradation of the other cell proteins and cells around them that can then lead to large amounts of damage in the brain and the spinal cord. And this affects all of the brain and spinal cord's normal functions. So now the cattle are not able to move properly, and they have a hard time with their coordination. And they're not able to control their emotions anymore, and they have more anxiety and aggression. So altogether, these can kind of create a really angry state for them. What's interesting about this infection is it's also that humans can get a similar thing by eating meat of infected animals. And this is called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. And so the humans can experience very similar symptoms when they eat this infected meat. Okay, so next up we have biting and foaming and a little bit more of that aggression. And this can all be explained by rabies. So like I mentioned, I'm scared of raccoons, and this is exactly because of rabies. So rabies is a virus that infects raccoons, bats, and dogs, and it spreads through scratching or biting of rabid animals. So what happens here is the virus actually gets into the central nervous system and causes aggressive behavior in these animals and makes them want to bite and attack people. What I find really evil about this virus is actually that it also causes a buildup of saliva in the mouth, and the saliva is where the virus is contained. And it also causes a fear of water. So this fear of water means that the animals aren't going to get water, and they're not washing out that saliva from their mouth, so it accumulates even more. So when it's combined with that aggression, now when these animals are getting really aggressive and start biting people, that saliva is full of the virus, and it gets transmitted directly into the person. And so you have this huge rate of transmission that can really cause really bad infections in humans. And these infections are really scary because 100% of untreated rabies infections lead to death. So if you ever encounter a rabid animal, you have to get treatment right away and seek help, because they can be really scary things. Okay, so next we have bleeding and hemorrhaging. And this can be explained by the Ebola virus. So as many of you might remember, there was an outbreak of Ebola in 2014 in West Africa. And this infection originally started in humans because of exposure to the blood of infected animals. So with these infections, a lot of the times they start out with very flu-like symptoms that are very vague, but they progress very rapidly to the point where at day 11, you start having bleeding from all the different body sites. And then a day later, things get incredibly worse, and the patients succumb to their infections. So what's really dangerous about these infections is because you have all of the blood that's coming out of these patients, a lot of the family members as well as the healthcare workers that are helping these patients end up getting exposed to a lot of that blood and a lot of those viruses, which again affects the transmission. Okay, so last and probably the creepiest, are there microbes that can cause you to move while you're dead and be able to lose your self-control? And yes, of course, there absolutely are. There's lots of cases of mind controlling in nature. And so to better understand these different kinds of infections, we need to first understand what a parasite is. So a parasite is any living organism that lives within another organism, and they grow and benefit from that host at the expense of the host. So this is like having a friend stay with you for a long period of time, and they eat all of your food and trash your whole house. It's to their benefit, but you're suffering. And in the case with these zombie-like infections, the main goal of these infections is for them to be able to control their host's behavior in order to increase the transmission of their infection. So one really great example are Cordyceps, which are a fungal infection that infects many different kinds of insects, and in here in particular I'm showing you an ant. So these ants get infected by the fungus, and the fungus starts living inside of it and starts to grow. And slowly over time, the fungus mind controls the ant and forces the ant to climb up along sticks or trees so that they can get off the forest ground. And what this allows us to do is then when the fungus kills the ant, it can grow huge fungal spores out of the ant's head. And now because they had forced the ant to go higher off the ground, it can spread all of its fungal spores into the wind and therefore infect more and more ants. And here's just some of the other pictures of some of the really creepy structures that these fungus can grow on these ants. Okay, so that's mind control, but that's not really moving a dead animal or organism. So next we were hit with beetles. So beetles also get infected by another kind of parasite. Again, this is a fungus, but of a different family. And in this case, the fungus can infect the beetle and kill it. But then a couple of days after the beetle has died, you can observe that the beetle starts moving and it starts spreading out its wings as if it was still alive. So this is a dead beetle that is starting to move. And again, it's that fungus that is controlling the beetle and forcing it to move. And it does this so that it's more open and so that it can, again, increase its rate of transmission. So these are cases where there are microbes that are causing these zombie-like behaviors that are mind controlling and moving the dead insects. Okay, so taking this all together, we have different microbes that can cause every single one of the symptoms that I've outlined that are associated with zombies. So if microbes can really cause these symptoms, does that mean we have to worry about zombie infections? And the answer is probably not. It's highly unlikely that this could ever happen. So in a lot of the cases that I spoke about, you have microbes that are infecting ants or animals that then would have to learn how to infect humans. And while we often do get infections from associations with infected animals, the jump from infecting an ant and controlling its behavior to a human is a huge jump that's highly unlikely. The other thing is a lot of the infections I told you about were microbes causing one or two symptoms, but they'd really have to evolve to take on a lot of these properties and affect a lot of different symptoms if it was to create a whole zombie. Or you'd have to be able to be infected with multiple microbes that all together create the zombie phenotype, which again is really, really unlikely, but not entirely impossible. So it's not impossible, so we should probably come up with a good strategy for how to protect ourselves against this. And so what is the best way to protect yourself from zombie apocalypse? And it's definitely prevention. So this is the same with all infectious disease. The best way to protect yourself is to just avoid getting the infection altogether. And the best way to do that is to really make sure that you're getting as many defense mechanisms as you can. So vaccinating yourself, as well as just building a healthy immune system so that your body can fight off any infections that it comes encounter with. We also want to make sure that we don't abuse any of the weapons we already have. So we do have lots of drugs to treat bacterial and viral and fungal infections, but when we misuse these drugs, the microbes can become resistant to them. So we really want to go back to that rule is you can't kill a microbe if you don't know what it is. So we want to only be taking antibiotics if we have bacterial infections. And if you have a viral infection, you want to be taking something that works against the virus. So important that we really are careful about our use of these drugs. Okay, but now you're probably thinking, but really, what's the way to kill a zombie infection? And so a lot of the times in movies, you might see something like this. This would be the advice. It would be to choose your weapon, aim for the head, and make sure that you don't miss. And I swear every single movie has something like this, where in the end you have a decapitated zombie with blood everywhere. And at the end of the day, this is the worst strategy you could ever take. So if you think about everything that I've told you so far about infectious disease, and think about how this might not work. So now we have all of this blood splattering everywhere, right? And this blood has all of the viruses or bacteria or fungi that are causing the infections, and now you're splattering them everywhere, and it has a huge chance of infecting other people. So if we really, really, really need to kill these evil zombies, the best way I would say to do it would be fire. So this is obviously mostly a joke, but the idea here being that we don't want to have a huge amount of bodily fluid flying around, so it can keep more self-contained with the fire. And actually fire is a way, heat is a really great way that we use to kill microbes in the lab. And so we know that this works really well. So if you ever encounter a zombie anywhere and you need to know what to do, always remember fire. That's it. Thank you very much.